Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. Today on Exploring the Mystical Side of Life, we are definitely going to be exploring something mystical. Remember, if you enjoy this podcast, please give us some love, write a comment, a review, or share it with a friend. Today, my guest is Brian Watts, who has written a book called Northern Awakening, The Evolution of Consciousness. Brian had a spontaneous awakening experience, and he is going to share that with us today. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Linda. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. I'm really happy to have you. I'm quite fascinated with your story. You weren't on the spiritual path really at all when all of this happened. Is that correct?
That's correct. I would probably describe myself as being agnostic for much of my life, and maybe even atheist at certain times, and really was not pursuing any sort of religion or spirituality, even right up to the time when the experience happened.
And you actually have had more than one experience, but that very first awakening experience, maybe you could share what that was like for you.
Yeah, I would describe the awakening experience now, given having more information and a better understanding of spirituality and the process, as the awakening of the Kundalini. And right up until it happened, I had never heard the word Kundalini before in my life. What led me to it is basically I had a health concern at a certain point in my life when I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and it had led me to explore meditation and to really commit to it and practice it every day for a year, going from 15 minutes at a time up to over an hour. And towards the end of that year is when I first noticed something happening. And what I noticed was a sensation in my lower back, and it's down by the sacrum, which later I would find out is actually derived from the word sacred, and is said to be where the Kundalini is coiled 3.5 times, as per the mythology. And when I put my attention in this area on the sensation, I just felt two balls of energy roll up my back, either on either side of my spine, went right up over my head to the center of my forehead, and there was a flash of light.
Did those two balls of energy or light, did they wind around your spine or did they go straight up?
They moved. I could feel them on either side, just there's two channels, energy channels on either side of the spine, and they moved very slowly, and it was a very slow, deliberate process. Whether they were spinning internally, I didn't have that sensation, but I did feel them in a slow ascent up my back and right into my head, and then there was that blast of light.
That's a meridian in the Chinese system.
Yeah, both in the Hindu system and in the Chinese system, they describe these pathways. They basically, are pathways for what they describe as being the divine masculine and the divine feminine to rise up to your in China they would call it the upper dantian, or the third eye chakra in Hinduism. It activates a center of your mind and your consciousness that we normally don't have active, which brings about all kinds of unusual experiences.
How did your life or your perception shift after you had that Kundalini experience?
When it first happened, I didn't really notice anything different. I just was sitting there in meditation, and I said, "Well, that was strange," and I had to go look this up afterwards and see, look up my symptoms of what happened, and that's actually when I first saw the word Kundalini. But after the week following that experience, how I experienced life changed, and when I showed up to work, I greeted my colleagues, and I noticed something different. I noticed that I could sense what was going on with them. I could sense what they were feeling on the inside, and I just knew everything that's happening with them, and I had never experienced that before. And some people would say, well, that's just cues from, you see their eyes moving this way or that way, and you see them smiling or not smiling with their eyes, and these give you clues as to how they're feeling on the inside. And it was not that. It was a different way of perceiving people, and it was an energetic perception of that person, energy of their spirit.
Would you say that it opened your gift of empathy?
In Hinduism, they would refer to it as the gift of inner sight. As a consequence of that, yes, your empathy gets magnified many times. So when I would walk and encounter homeless people, I had immense empathy that was sort of overwhelming, and that I never experienced before, where I could feel what they were feeling, and I so that was also very new to me. And so when I left that space, and I would go walking down through the downtown area into the park, I also experienced a radiance from the trees, and the trees were just like they were glowing, and they were like this very beautiful organism of that was interconnected with everything else, and it was exchanging gases and energy with its environment, and it was amazing. And I took a photo with my phone of this tree, and then later I look at the photo and I'm like, oh, it's just a tree. But at that moment, I was intuiting the energy of the tree. Like I could see its radiance. After that, I continued through the park, and there was a homeless, Aboriginal man that was very angry, and he was drinking and started to throw sort of insults and hate towards me when I was walking by. And I experienced this like I've never experienced this, something like this before, where his hate came towards me as an object, and I could feel it moving towards me as an object, and then it passed through me, and it didn't touch anything inside me, didn't affect anything inside me. And I looked into his eyes, and I saw this the misery that was his existence, that was his life, and I felt nothing but compassion for him.
So, what you're saying is that our thoughts are actually real and tangible and send energy. I guess it could be positive, loving energy or hateful energy that can affect other people if they're not in, I guess, that state of love and acceptance.
That's a good way to put it. I wouldn't describe it as thoughts. I would describe it as the energetic intention behind the thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what is getting directed at people, and that's what can affect them. To experience it as I did, that was the way I should have always experienced that. That was the best way to experience that, the more compassionate way to experience that.
When you tell that story, I think of the evil eye and traditions of how to protect yourself from the evil eye. Yet it seems like the best protection is love and compassion.
Yeah, I think we are responsible energetically for our own experience internally, and it doesn't have to be affected by your environment. It doesn't have to be affected by other people's intentions or their, state of mind or emotion.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Were there any other gifts that showed up or surfaced from this experience?
I really started to experience more synchronicities that I, maybe I didn't pay attention to before, but once this Kundalini was active, I started noticing these coincidences everywhere that were not that I believe were not actually coincidences, but there was actually a plan. And that's how you start to experience things, is that everything has significance, everything has meaning in this life, and that there's a plan for everyone. And that is what starts to become apparent. An example is, running into a colleague. In the past, I would have just been like, oh, hey, how's it going? It's, coincidence seeing you here. But, in that moment, after the Kundalini awakening, I knew that meeting him in the lobby was not an accident, and that I had a message that I needed to pass on to him that was going to help him on his journey. And it just kind of flowed through me like I wasn't even the one delivering the message.
You really got a sense of how interconnected everyone and everything is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's part of the enhanced intuition that you get. You start to see the big picture for everything and for everyone, and that everyone and everything is interconnected.
And have these gifts stayed with you, or were they temporary after your experience?
The energy was locked into a certain energetic center when I was experiencing all of those things. And you can control or move the energy in your body once you understand how that system works and what it's about. You can actually access, I guess, those gifts. I wouldn't say on command. It would be more like you can get into a state where they are more likely to occur. Yeah, and that was my experience after that. It was not continuous, bombardment with other people's emotions. It would be on and off, and depending on where the energy actually was circulating in my body at the time. And that's the theory behind it, is that it actually will circulate and integrate itself into your body. And I mean, there was times where I felt like I could feel it all around my body, like my exterior was just glowing. And I, had never had a sensation like that before.
Did you ever think you were losing your mind?
Yes, I think when it first happened, it gives you extra spiritual energy, which you have to get used to. And in the months just after the awakening, I did experience some emotional disturbances, some enhanced anger, enhanced sadness, and all kinds of a range of emotions. And what I realized, and I use this analogy in my book, is that it was kind of like learning to operate a remote control car when you're a kid. You put these new batteries in the car and you put it down and you hit the lever and it just flies into the wall, and then you back up and it reverses over the cat. You're not really in control for the first while. It's just like going all over, until you understand, basically, you need to maintain your equanimity. You need to maintain that inner peace, and to stay in those higher levels of vibration, with compassion, with using empathy, compassion, and love, and the higher vibrations, and that really helps.
Did it trigger deeper spiritual connection with the divine, or give you more understanding, maybe, of life as a spiritual experience?
Yeah, I mean, it led me to all sorts of realizations. One of the more significant events was that it basically led me to experience the enlightened states in meditation. And that is what it was designed for. It is designed to advance you on the spiritual path very rapidly. And I entered what Tibetan Buddhists would call the first jhana, which is a state of consciousness that precedes enlightenment. And when I experienced that, I was flooded with immense love and happiness and joy, and it flooded my body. My consciousness felt like it was pulled from me and inside and into a tunnel of light. It was an amazing experience, and one that made me realize a lot about this world, that we are not these flesh beings and not solely made of this material. We are an energetic being, and we are here for an experience, and we are here to learn and evolve. And that's basically what I took away from that experience, is that there's so much more going on here. This is not it. This is not all there is.
So much more, so much more. Brian, I'm curious if you think that tunnel is the same tunnel that the soul travels through when it leaves the body upon death.
In my research and the studies that I got deeply into after these experiences occurred, I came across the discussions and videos of the DMT that they started to call the spirit molecule. And the interesting thing about it is that it's present at 3 specific times: when you're born, when you die, and during states of enlightenment. And that it may be facilitating a passage between that sort of spiritual world, that astral world, and this world. And that is, what people experience when they talk about being in a tunnel and the light radiating at the end of the tunnel. That's what I experienced.
This is a really deeply personal experience that you had that totally changed your life and your outlook. I'm curious why you wrote a book about it.
I think it was because I felt compelled to write the book. It was like the most amazing experience I've ever had. It was the most amazing connections I've ever found between, science and spirituality and all of the cultures of the world, that they all knew about this. They all knew about this path to enlightenment, and they all wrote about it. And a lot of those writings have been misinterpreted. A lot of those writings have been lost and were discarded as nonsense. And when in fact they were actually trying to communicate something very significant to us.
You're talking about the ancient wisdom school teachings, what some people might refer to. All the ancient cultures had a system of spirituality. So you're saying these systems had a process that would take you into connection with the divine.
Yes. The earliest cultures that knew about this path were the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Egyptians. The Sumerians were much earlier than the Egyptians, and from their writings we get stories of the Anunnaki and the Shining Ones that became the angels and demons of the Bible. The Egyptians, who talked about a whole pantheon of gods that were around during the times of ancient Egypt, they all had this method for achieving enlightenment, and they all wrote a path to achieving enlightenment. And that was communicated down the line and became a major part of the majority of religions we have today. And the thing is that some of those religions remained intact, others lost components and parts of this process. But if you study that, if you look at it from the perspective that I'm looking at it from, you start to understand that they were all talking about the exact same thing. They were all trying to communicate the exact same experience and to guide us to that experience.
Well, I think one of the things that your experience teaches us is that although that wisdom may be lost on a conscious level, it's still possible to have that experience, that when it's time to be enlightened, it's going to come and wake you up.
Yes, and I've been told by others that I guided myself to this experience. They say that it's your higher self that's guiding you, and yeah, and it's present in everyone. And so when it's your time, when you've experienced enough of what you need to experience, and it's time to progress, then it's going to happen. And there's all kinds of warnings about, not trying to make this happen prematurely, not forcing it, allowing it, just being open to it and allowing it to happen, when it happens. Because there's been some bad experiences as well with Kundalini awakenings. And it helps to do, some of the things I talk about in my book, to maintain equanimity, to continue your meditation practice, to practice, compassion and loving kindness. And this is why, someone like the Dalai Lama speaks so much about compassion, and it is actually an integral part of the enlightenment process. If you don't develop enough compassion, then you don't advance very far on this pathway. When you look at all of the various religions, Buddhism in particular, they focused on the ego. You must eliminate the ego. You must become egoless. If you're going to experience these states, you need to lose that ego. The ego can't come with you.
And yet you were just an ordinary guy, not thinking about anything spiritual, not thinking about the ego or anything like this. And it came and woke you up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. The magic of the universe. I love it. Brian, just before we close out, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I would just like to say that this universe is much, much bigger than anyone can even imagine. That your role in this is much more significant than anyone could imagine. That we all have a purpose, we all have a meaning and to our lives. We're all on this evolutionary path together, and it's very important that you are open to these sort of experiences and to understand that everything you do in this life matters.
Beautiful. And I would just like to add that you are loved more than you can imagine.
Yes, that's what radiates from the universe.
Would you like to share any contact information or details about your book?
My book, Northern Awakening, The Evolution of Consciousness, can be found on Amazon Kindle. There's other sites such as Facebook, that if you go on Facebook and you type in Brian C. Watts or Northern Awakening, you will find some information there. Same thing on LinkedIn, if you want to connect on LinkedIn. Yeah, so I'm open to have discussions with people as well if anyone else is experiencing this, and if they need any advice or guidance, I'm open to have those discussions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you again, Brian. And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Come and visit me at thoughtchange.com. Check out my new program, Alchemy from the Inside Out, to see what energy medicine can do for you. Bye for now. Thanks for exploring the mystical side of life with us. Remember to subscribe. We appreciate your support. Thank you.